hopefully folks can join the chat. I know a lot of this technology is new to all of us, so if anyone needs help, feel free to unmute yourself and let us know.
Ricky, I'm gonna change it right now. Can you tell me if it changes quickly?
It is.
Yes.
Very quickly on my end too.
Okay.
Oh, great. McDowell County, West Virginia, thanks for joining us.
Okay. We good?
Yes.
Okay.
Lexi.
So Jason, you're going to drive the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, and just so people know, we're recording this session so that we can share it with people afterwards. And we're gonna I'm gonna go ahead and start broadcasting live from Facebook. So we will get that going from the Martin County Concerned Citizens page. And yeah, as folks join, please share share in the chat where you're calling in from. Neat. Thanks for calling in from Fayetteville, North Carolina, Brian. It's good to have you here. Okay. I think we are streaming live on Facebook. Awesome. Mary, if you can. Oh, it looks like we're live.
Wait, okay,
yeah.
You've got it? Let's see if I can.
Yes. We have one person, I think that's Madison watching.
Just checking.
Awesome. Okay, great. So we've got it going live. So glad that this is an experiment for us. So we're so glad that so far it seems to be working well. Welcome everyone. We're gonna get started in a few minutes. If you're joining from Zoom or if you're joining on Facebook, if you want to comment and let us know where you're calling in from or where you're based tonight, we'd love to see where people are joining us from. And Jason, if you could go to that first slide, there we go. Awesome. Well, welcome to our community report back. We are so glad to have everyone here. As a reminder, if you're on our Zoom meeting, please mute your mics and turn off your video during the presentation. That will just help us make sure that everyone can stay connected and reduce the amount of internet we're all using on our computers. So we are so excited to be here. The presentation will last about 45 minutes, and then we will have a question and answer session. But throughout the presentation, as questions come up, or if you have comments about the material, please put them in the Zoom chat or in the Facebook chat, and we will be monitoring that the whole time and make sure that that we either address your questions tonight or get to them at another time after this. So if you'd like to receive a pamphlet with more information about the results of our study, I'm going to put a link in the chat where you can click the link, and then it will direct you to a online form, and there's questions on there that asks your name and your best way to get in contact with you so we can send you this pamphlet. You can also email me at this email address on the screen, rdraper@liken.knowledge.org. This is, we're doing sort of a more formal presentation. There will be a lot of presenters sharing this information back, but we really want to hold as much space for question and answers as we can tonight, but we expect not to be able to get to everything. So we are having the next Martin County Concerned Citizens meeting Thursday, August 20th at 6 p.m. That will be a virtual meeting as well. So this is kind of practice. So then we'll be ready to get a lot of comments and feedback from the community and hear from folks about what these, be able to ask more questions and talk through what these results are. Thank you so much for joining us. And now I will pass it off to Nina McCoy, who will introduce the presentation.
Hello, this is Nina. I am so sorry that we can't do this in person up at our beautiful new Martin County High School in their lovely auditorium. That is what our original plan was. But unfortunately, COVID-19 has done a lot to ruin plans. So I just wanted to welcome you to this. We were hoping it to be sort of with the Martin County people, but now we've got a lot more people involved, so that's probably a good thing. So just to first introduce you to the people who are going to be presenting tonight. I'm going to start off as the chairperson of the Martin County Concerned Citizens, and then Mary Cromer is going to take over and talk about her work for us with the Appalachian Citizens Law Center. I want you to know that she has given us free legal advice for the last 3 years. And this organization needs help in any way they can because they have stuck with us through thick and thin. So Appalachian Citizens Law Center, woo. And then Madison Mooney. Madison is a hometown girl from right here, and we love her so much. She's from right here in downtown Inez, and she was a helper with actually going around to all the houses. And then we have, we're going to have Dr. Jason Unrein, who is actually the lead scientist on this and got all of this, made all this possible. And got all the materials and trained us to do this work. Ricky Draper went with me and Madison to the houses around the county and works with the concerned citizens and through Lichen. And then Dr. Ormsby has been working with the water district itself in helping them get their engineering and modeling down for how the whole system runs. So we're all going to be talking about different things tonight. Next, we're going to have, oh, and I also just want to say right here that I have enjoyed this so much. This has been the best experience. Not only have I been able to see parts of the county I never got to see as I traveled around to different houses, I got to see old friends, I got to see former students, and got to meet new people. And so we appreciate all those people who worked with us in the county. It reminded me why it's so good to live here. We're going to start with the historical background, and as the old lady of the county, that will be me because, you know, I got all that old knowledge, but also I'm kind of understanding where we are at this time too. Then we're going to have Mary Cromer talk about her work with the Appalachian Citizens Law Center to help us. Then Madison is going to explain the study and how we actually did the study and the research design. We're going to have the results. Dr. Unrein is going to talk about what he found in the water as far as the tap water is concerned. And then Ricky Draper is going to talk about what issues the residents told us when we did a survey of how they felt about the water. And then Dr. Ormsby is going to then come back to how does this actually, how can we fix anything that might be going on? And then we're going to come to conclusions and then some question and answers. So if we start with a little historical background, and we're going to have to go way back to 1968 here and talk about that this is kind of an old system. It was built in 1968 for 600 households. And unfortunately, not a lot was done to upgrade the plant itself. Instead, more was done to just keep adding more people onto the system as their wells went bad or as they had problems. And so it's old. It's an old infrastructure that has been spread thin, and that is the first problem that we know we have to deal with. Second of all, the next thing is those of us who are of a certain age will remember a day that will live in infamy in Martin County, October 11th of 2000, when we had the worst man-made environmental disaster east of the Mississippi at the time. This is what's called a containment pond for coal waste, and this broke through the bottom. It broke through the bottom and released 306 million gallons of toxic coal slurry into 2 different streams. Coldwater, if you look at the next slide there, Coldwater Creek on one side of the county and Wolf Creek on the other side of the county. So this emptied, both of these empty into the Big Sandy, the Tug Fork of the Big Sandy River, which is where we get our drinking water. Now, the thing is, those of us paying attention at the time were hearing everything from the coal company executives telling us that it was safe to feed this stuff to your children, to EPA saying, well, you don't have to worry about it. Your water plant can take out any of that stuff. At the same time, if you go to the next slide there, Jason, at the same time, we had some clandestine copies of this. I actually got this, this paper from the former mayor of Warfield, Tom Hayes. And while we were being told that our water plant could take care of anything that was in it, if you look at what we were seeing, filters are not washed properly. Obviously, filters would be very important. Filter control valves do not operate properly. So that led to a lot of distrust of not only the system, but also the regulators who were telling us from the federal, the state levels that everything was fine, don't worry about it. So finally, in the next year, we got to hear that there was actually, this investigation showed a lot of problems. This inspection, it finally came out public in the local paper that this inspection showed many problems. So in 2002, the Public Service Commission in Frankfurt opened an investigation into how well the water plant could function. And when they did, they found 43 action items that they recommended that were very important to the running of the system. And then they told them what to do. Unfortunately, they waited, no, let's go back one. They waited 4 years to, let's go back to, there you go, yeah. They waited until 2006, and when they came back, they saw that most of the recommendations were unimplemented, as they put it. So they made more recommendations, and they said, you know, the plant's got a lot of problems, and the system has a lot of problems. They made 78 recommendations. So in 2000, now all this time we're not trusting anything, and so a lot of us are buying bottled water. Most of us are buying bottled water. 2016, another investigation was opened, and they found the 78 recommendations had largely been unimplemented too. So that leads us to, that is the investigation that we led to now. So the next thing, next slide, is that we continuously got what were called violations, the safe drinking water violations. And if you'll notice on this, this was actually on the back of our bills for many years. And if you look in parentheses, it's THM and HAA. And then if you look in italics, it tells us that water containing those in excess over many years may experience problems with their liver, kidneys, central nervous system, and an increased risk of getting cancer. Again, a long time. 2000 to 2017 is a pretty long time to us. And so we didn't trust our water still. So the next thing that so we were wondering what those trihalomethanes were, and found out that it's what's called disinfection byproducts. Now, disinfection byproducts, if you'll just go to the next slide, I got sort of an easy version of this, is when they add chlorine to disinfect the water. And if there's any organic matter, which might be there from wood that decays, leaves that decay, algae, maybe a little sewage when you live in a place where there's a lot of septic problems, then that matter, of course we want chlorine to kill any germs, but when it mixes with it, it produces what are called disinfection byproducts. So that led us to another level of distrust of the system. Next slide. Then in 2016, we started to see a lot of brown water. And this is what would show up on a group called Martin County Water Warriors, who were tech savvy and decided they were going to show that we have problems here. And we saw a lot of brown water. We also saw a lot of outages. There was times when school had to be called off because half the county was without water. And so the question was, what's going on here? We were told, oh, it's pump problems. We were told, oh, it's water line problems. Sometimes we heard, oh, it's money problems. So our question was, what is it and what's in our water? If it's clear, if it's brown, what's going on? So luckily, this got noticed. This picture right here and several like it got noticed by a lovely lady named Mary Cromer, who is a lawyer that works with Appalachian Citizens Law Center. And so when she saw that this was going on, she called us up and she said, would you all like some help, some legal representation for the community to find out what's going on? And we were like, yes, please, thank you. And she showed up and has been with us in this ever since. So now I'm going to let you hear from Mary Cromer, and she's going to explain her part in this situation.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Nina. Hi, I am Mary Cromer. I'm Deputy Director of Appalachian Citizens Law Center, and ACLC provides free legal services to minors and individuals and community groups who are dealing with environmental and social justice issues. As Nina mentioned, I began representing Martin County Concerned Citizens in 2017, and most of my formal legal work with the group has been in representing the group before the Public Service Commission as part of the investigation and as part of the rate case that was filed in 2018. We felt it was really important to focus our legal strategy at the PSC because the PSC has a really broad mandate. Its jurisdiction is to ensure that the water district provides a reasonable, safe, and adequate water service to its customers. So that the PSC's jurisdiction includes water quality, it includes financial issues, it includes the distribution system, it includes the engineering. It's pretty much, it looks at everything that the water district is doing to ensure that it's able to provide a good, reasonable, safe product for its customers. And in addition, this PSC has stated on many occasions that it is absolutely committed to sticking with its oversight of the Martin County Water District until the problems are resolved. So we have continued to do work before the PSC and represent the group before the PSC. But that's just one little piece of what we've been doing with the Martin County Concerned Citizens. And I want to talk just a little bit about how important it is to have an organized community group. Community organizing is critical to addressing any kind of large-scale systemic issues like this in a community. It can't be done by just one person or just a handful of people. It really takes a group of people coming together to make this work. And fortunately, that is what we've had in Martin County. You can see that picture there of one of our community meetings from last summer. It's necessary to have that group because, I mean, you have to have it. It's a prerequisite for legal representation to go before the PSC. You have to have an organized formal group. But it's also a way for the community to be able to speak with one voice in a way that it can't be ignored. And it allows us to elevate individual community members' concerns in a way that ensures that decision makers are listening. So I just want to put a plug in for Martin County Concerned Citizens. It's critical to all of this work that group remain active and organized. As we started having, and Jason, this is a good time for the next slide. As we started meeting with Martin County Concerned Citizens, 4 problems really rose to prominence as the main issues that the community was dealing with the water system. And those are the water quality and health concerns that you see there, as well as the engineering problem, just the state of the water system, as Nina was talking about. And then the lack of trust, and this is a lack of trust in the water itself, and then also sort of two-way lack of trust between the community members and the water district, in that the water district often would ignore or sort of downplay the concerns community members were raising, and sometimes even sort of act as if they just didn't believe what the community members were saying. And then also, you know, that the water district, the citizens didn't trust the water district because of the years of just extreme mismanagement of the system that had gone on. And finally, the concern of affordability. Martin County is a very poor county. Almost 40% of its residents are living below the federal poverty level, and it has one of the highest water rates in the state of Kentucky. So we are always, we hear again and again about concerns about being able to pay water bills, and you know, that is one of the critical issues that the Concerned Citizens Group is dealing with. So, you know, I mentioned that there are a lot of, the problems are not the type of problems that can be addressed just through one legal action. And so one of the things that we felt in the beginning was really critical was to get scientists involved and have a scientific study to really look at what's in the water and to document what the community's health concerns were. So I reached out to UK Cares, which is the Center for Appalachian Research and Environmental Sciences at UK, and Ellen Hahn put me in touch with Dr. Unrein, and he and his colleagues were really enthusiastic about figuring out what they could do to help Martin County, and that is how this pilot study came about. And now I'm going to turn it over to Madison to talk a little bit about how the study, who she is and how the study was done. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Hi, everyone. I'm Madison Mooney. Before I get started with talking about the study, I want to first talk about how I got involved with this project. So about 1.5 years ago, I was at UK getting my master's in social work. And during my time at UK, a woman sent me an email. Her name is Catherine Engel. So Dr. Engel, this is for you. She got me involved with the Appalachian Center, which is on campus, and she got me involved with this internship project last summer. And I was able to come back home to my hometown and to be involved with this work, this project. So thanks, Dr. Engel, for sending that email. But to continue, so the study, the pilot drinking water study. So first slide, please. This study design was 97 randomly selected houses throughout the county. Within our county, we divided it into 4 zones. So there was zone 1, 2, 3, 4. Zone 1 is homes in the county that are closer to the water plant, and zone 4 were homes that were further away from the water plant. And within this study, we randomly had a bunch of addresses within the county, and within these addresses, we went to these certain zones that were in this address. We were able to take samples during the winter, early fall, and summer. During this process, we were, as we were selecting these addresses, we would pick about 5 to 10 addresses per zone and go to that certain area a day and try to collect samples. Some days we had none, some days we had 5, but all in all, it was, back to back, and we wanted to get different seasons during this process. And so once we were able to get to a home, we were able to start the water testing. Next slide, please. So the water testing, once we were able in the home and the family, was consent to let us come in and test their water, we were testing some of these categories: the pH, the metals, the chlorine, the conductivity, temperature, chloroform bacteria, and disinfection byproducts. And during this process, we would go in homes and we would test for these certain substances and put them in certain bottles. And once we had them in certain bottles, we would we would send them off to labs in Lexington and Pikeville to collect the data. And then after we tested their water, got samples from their tap, we went on to the next portion, which was the health survey and questionnaire. Next slide, please. So the health survey and questionnaire consisted of closed-ended and open-ended questions regarding the health in the home and the water. Some of the questions that we asked were the demographics, which is info, age, sex, and age of the home. Another example question was, have you experienced any of the following issues with your water? Smell, discoloration, low pressure. And another example question was, have you or your family experienced any of the following health issues? And so we would go through this questionnaire with the family, and then we compiled the data, and we was able to come up with multiple different results regarding the water and the health survey. And so now I'm going to direct your attention to Dr. Jason Unrein for the results.
Thank you for that, Madison. And I want to thank you and Nina and Ricky, Mary, for all your hard work on the study. It couldn't have been done without you. It's been a real pleasure to work with you. And most of all, I want to thank the citizens of Martin County, and in particular, the participants of the study who volunteered to allow us to sample and fill out the questionnaire. Without you all, it really wouldn't have been possible. As we go through this, if you ever have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. UK Cares and the University of Kentucky is here to serve you, so please don't hesitate to reach out. So I don't want to drag on through the details and have you wondering what the final results are. I'm just going to give you some key findings right off the bat, and then I'm going to talk about those in detail as we go along. So the key findings are that the disinfection byproducts that Nina mentioned, and specifically total trihalomethanes and haloacetic acids. And coliform bacteria were the most frequent contaminants that we measured that had levels that exceeded what are called EPA maximum contaminant levels in individual samples. We did not observe levels of potentially toxic metals that exceeded US EPA maximum contaminant levels. So I know there's been a lot of concern over the years about potential contamination of the drinking water from the coal slurry spill in 2000. Now, we didn't look at every possible chemical that could be present in coal slurry, but there are a number of metals that could be there, and we didn't see those in the drinking water. Some samples had levels of aluminum and iron that exceeded what are called EPA secondary maximum contaminant levels. So these are non-enforceable standards that are not based on health concerns. They're based on things like the appearance of the water or the taste of the water, and we'll get into that in more detail later. So I want to explain a little bit more about the water treatment process and how disinfection byproducts are formed. Nina gave you a little bit of an overview. So in Martin County, the source of the water is actually the Tug Fork River. And that's pumped into the Crum Reservoir up on top of the hill where it's stored. And then it's, I understand, gravity fed down to the treatment plant. Now in the treatment plant, particles are settled out of the water using chemicals called coagulants as part of the process. And I'll be mentioning that again later, the importance of that. The water's then filtered and chlorine is added to disinfect. And then it goes through a pretty complicated system of pipes and storage tanks that Dr. Ormsby will be talking about before it goes to your home. Now in the river and in the Crum Reservoir, Nina mentioned natural organic matter. So one of the types of natural organic matter comes from decaying leaves and wood or just any sort of plant material. So if you've ever seen a river or a creek or a pond that looks like tea, that's actually the chemicals that are coming out of the decaying plant matter. In fact, it's the same chemicals that give tea or coffee its dark color. And that's good, that's a normal process in nature. Another type is algae. And so in the picture in the bottom, when you see an excessive amount of algae in a lake or river, it's called an algal bloom. And of course, we want some algae to be in the water, but if there's too much, it can cause problems. It has to be removed. And that can result from too much nutrients going into the water. So that can be runoff from farm fields, or it could be sewage or other sources. So, and this is a little bit of a simplification because it's not just organic matter involved, but organic matter is one of the main important processes for what we're looking at here. When those react with chlorine-based disinfectants, you get the disinfection byproducts. And so there are a number of different disinfection byproducts that are regulated by the US EPA. And we focus on two classes of disinfection byproducts that Nina mentioned Martin County residents were receiving notices from the water company about. So those are total trihalomethanes and haloacetic acids. So TTHMs and HAA5. So I'll be mentioning those throughout. This is a very common drinking water violation in the United States. And there, according to the EPA, there's as many as 11 million people that are receiving water that has violations for these. How are you exposed to these disinfection byproducts? Well, it's pretty obvious that if you drink the water, you're going to be exposed. But what you might not know is that some of these chemicals can move from the water to the air. So you might inhale them when you're cooking, washing, or taking a shower or bathing. When you're taking a shower or bathing, you could also absorb some of them through the skin. What are the potential health effects? So already Nina mentioned some of the potential health effects that EPA lists in their notices for violations, and those are cancer, liver, kidney, or central nervous system problems. But I also want to talk about some frequently observed health effects that are associated with these chemicals at levels that are sometimes found in drinking water. And some of this research has been done since EPA last updated their regulations. And the ones that are fairly consistent are bladder cancer and heart birth defects, and I'll explain those later. So I'm going to jump right into some of the results. So when you look at this graph here, along the bottom of the graph horizontally, those are the dates that we sampled. And vertically, where it says total trihalomethanes, those are the concentrations that we measured in the water. And each one of the gray dots represents an individual home that we sampled. The red line is the EPA maximum contaminant level, which is 0.08. So 28% of the houses were above the maximum contaminant, or sorry, 29% of the houses were above the maximum contaminant level, so above that red line. And this is for total trihalomethanes. And that occurred primarily in the summer and in the early to mid fall. So you may have gotten a notice that if you were a participant that your water had a concentration above the maximum contaminant level, or you may not have, it may have been below, but it really depends on when we took the sample. So if it was below, sometimes it could be above and vice versa. So this graph shows pretty much the same thing for the haloacetic acid, so HAA5. So we had about 10% of the houses that were above the EPA limit of 0.06 for this chemical. And that had a little bit different pattern. We didn't see that in the fall. We really only saw it pretty much in the middle of the summer when the temperature was highest. So one thing I want to emphasize is that Martin County was technically in compliance with EPA regulations during our study. And that's because drinking water utilities are allowed to exceed the maximum contaminant level in individual samples. And in fact, they've been in compliance with the regulation for the past couple of years, and that's why notices haven't been going out. So the way compliance is determined is based on an annual average that's updated every time samples are collected and analyzed. And so in the case of Martin County, I believe that that happens quarterly, so 4 times a year, and they sample from 2 different locations. Our study sampled 97 different locations at around 30 different time points, or on 30 different days, give or take. But the overall average was below the MCL for these chemicals. So one of the questions that we were asked was whether the water quality was better in certain parts of the county than others. So what I'm showing you here is a map of where the samples were collected. And these aren't the exact locations. So to protect the privacy of people that participated in the study, we moved the symbols in random directions so that you can't tell exactly where they came from, but they're in the general area. So the red symbols are the ones that were above the maximum contaminant level for trihalomethanes, and the black symbols were the ones that were below. And then, so you'll notice the symbols are different shapes. Triangles are for summer, diamonds for fall, circles for winter, squares for spring. So almost all of the red shapes are diamonds or triangles that's in the summer and fall, which I showed before. So the important thing here is there's really no pattern. We didn't find a pattern. They're sort of randomly distributed around the county. So it didn't really matter where you were in the county, just the time that the sample was taken. Now, this is the other kind of disinfection byproducts that we looked at, the HAA5, and this was a little bit different. So if you live further from the treatment plant, you had a higher probability of having the concentration be over the maximum contaminant level. So it's different between the 2 different types of disinfection byproducts. So how do Martin County levels compare with human health studies? So the concentrations are similar to those in studies that show small increases in bladder cancer rates. Now, this study has come out after the EPA regulations were last updated, I believe. But those increases are a result of very long exposure time. So most of the participants in those studies were using the water for more than 40 years. So we don't have that much information in terms of 40 years of data for Martin County. We have the 1 year of our study and then there were 15 years or so of violations and regulatory data that we might be able to get to reconstruct the dose. So it's very important to understand that very long exposure times for cancer to develop. The concentrations in Martin County are also similar to those that have been associated with certain types of heart birth defects. Now, this is a little bit different because this is mainly exposure during pregnancy and specifically during the first 3 months of pregnancy. So it's a shorter exposure time. Let me get into a little bit more details about bladder cancer. So nationally, the average number of bladder cancer cases per year has been about 17 to 20 per 100,000 people. Now, if you divide that number by 10, there's approximately 10,000 people in Martin County. That gives you about around 2 cases per year would be the background rate. This map on the right are the data from the Kentucky Cancer Registry. So the average for Kentucky is 22.5 cases per 100,000 people per year. And so that puts it a little bit above the average for the national rate. And if you look at Martin County, which I've got the arrow pointing to, the purple arrow, it's about average for Kentucky. So there are some counties that are higher and some counties that are lower. So I want to talk a little bit about a couple studies for these effects that I think are significant studies that have a lot of participants in them and pretty consistent results. So one is called the Villanueva study. So this image at the right is just showing you what, it's a bladder and it's showing you what bladder cancer would look like. You could see inside the bladder. So the national background rate is about 18 per 100,000 people per year. The increase that they saw in this study, if we applied that increase to the national average background rate, that would mean that you would see 26 cases per 100,000 people per year. So an increase of about 8 cases per 100,000 people per year. But remember, this assumes lifelong exposure. So in the study, most of the people were exposed for more than 40 years, and they used water for drinking, bathing, and cooking. So if everyone in the county was exposed for the majority of their lifetime, based on the population of the county, you would expect an additional case of bladder cancer per year if we use what they observed in this study. So I also mentioned the heart defects. So this picture at the right is showing a heart, and the heart has 4 different chambers. So the 2 chambers at the top are called the atria. And what can happen when a baby is born is there can be a hole connecting those 2 chambers, and it's not supposed to be there. And so that allows blood to flow from one side to the other. So if you've ever had a doctor do an ultrasound when you're pregnant, this is one of the things that they're looking for. Sometimes that hole closes back up and sometimes it doesn't. So the national rate of this is 1 per 1,859 births. So the rate, assuming the increase that they observed in this Wright et al. Study, which they looked at 10,000 babies in this study, would be 1.5 per 1,859 births. So this assumes using water for drinking, bathing, and cooking during the first 3 months of pregnancy. So it's different than cancer in terms of the length of time. So I looked it up, and Martin County has around 150 live births per year. So it would take more than a decade of exposure using water for all its uses before you would expect to see an additional case of this type of heart birth defect. Okay, let me move on to the coliform bacteria. So we found coliform bacteria in 13% of the samples. Okay, so what are coliform bacteria? They're bacteria that are present naturally in soil. They're not necessarily harmful, but they can indicate that harmful organisms could possibly be present in the drinking water because they aren't being killed by the chlorine. Now, there's a specific type of coliform bacteria called E. coli, and many people have, I'm sure, heard of this before. And that's a potentially harmful type of bacteria that indicates contamination with human or animal waste. So it could be runoff from livestock or it could be sewage. But the good news is we didn't find it in the water. So I want to sort of talk a little bit about these 2 things because it's important to understand that we're balancing risks here. So we need chlorine for disinfection because if harmful organisms are present in the water, you can become sick very quickly. The chlorine, on the other hand, reacts with organic matter to form disinfection byproducts. So we need to somehow reduce those disinfection byproducts, but still kill the harmful organisms, so maintain disinfection. And that takes a lot of really complicated engineering and hard work. And Dr. Ormsby is going to talk more about that. I want to talk a little bit about the metal results now. We found exceedances of secondary maximum contaminant levels for aluminum in 10 houses and iron in 1 house. So these are not a threat to human health, but they can affect the color or taste of the tap water. So an example is the aluminum can cause cloudiness in the tap water. And one possible source of that is the treatment water process. So there's a chemical that contains aluminum that's added to help settle particles out of the water. And that is one possible source of it. We didn't see levels of potentially toxic metals such as arsenic, mercury, lead, or cadmium above the maximum contaminant levels. So these are the ones, as I mentioned before, that could possibly be associated with coal waste. But the levels that we saw were pretty low. Okay, I'm going to pass it on to Ricky, and she's going to talk about the questionnaire and just the general issues.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Unrein. So in every house that we were able to test water in, we also had this questionnaire that Madison talked a little bit about some of the questions we asked. So we wanted to report back what we heard from the 97 households throughout the whole county and what people reported experiencing at some time with their tap water. So if we can go to the next slide, thank you. So 99% of the houses that we resurveyed had some issue with their tap water. The top issue that people said that they experienced sometimes was low water pressure. 74% of houses said that at some point they had experienced low water pressure. 67% of people said that they have seen excessive bubbles in their water, and you'll see that picture. The water, if you've ever had a glass of water that comes out cloudy and looks like that white color, and if you put it on your counter, you might see that the bubbles start going away and it gets clear. And so that is often a result of excessive bubbles that come through the line. So we had a significant amount of people said they had experienced that. Next, 66% of houses said that they had a bad odor coming out from their tap. And 51% said that their water has come out discolored. A lot of people said that it came out discolored maybe after a water outage or after a line break. So they said that's when they noticed it. Finally, the last top issue is that people said that the water irritated or burned their skin or someone in their household skin. So that was 24% of people reported those issues. So finally, we wanted to share the numbers of people who reported drinking the household tap water. So 12% of the county, of the houses that we surveyed, said that they drink the water all or some of the time. 88% of households said that they do not drink the Martin County tap water at all, and instead overwhelmingly rely on bottled water for drinking. Finally, household usage for cooking. 55% of households said that they use the water for cooking some or all of the time. A lot of people actually distinguish between using tap water for certain types of cooking, like when they're going to boil it, or and then not using it for others. 45% of the county said that they do not use the water at all for cooking and instead mostly rely on bottled water for that. Those were the top issues that we wanted to share with you that we heard, and to kind of have some numbers behind what we hear. So now these are numbers that we can share and say that these issues are widespread throughout the county. I want to emphasize, of course, that this was just, people reported that this happened just some of the time. These aren't issues that people are having for the most part on a daily basis. So now I'm gonna hand it off to Dr. Ortensby, who's the director of the Kentucky Water Resource Research Institute, and he's gonna share some strategies that the Water District and Alliance and KWRRI are pursuing in order to reduce disinfection byproducts from the drinking water. I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Ricky. It's great to be with you all this evening. And as Ricky said, my name is Lyndall Ormsby, and I'm with the Kentucky Water Research Institute at the University of Kentucky. And part of our mission is to work with local communities and water and wastewater utilities across the state to help protect the environment and also the health and citizens of those that live in the environment. So I again, like Jason, want to thank Martin County Concerned Citizens and also Alliance Water for the opportunity to work with both of them on their water system. So we've talked a little bit about DBP so far, and Jason gave a good introduction to those. And I would like to take just a few minutes to talk about some ways that we can try to reduce disinfectant byproducts or reduce the exposure to them, and talk about some of the ways that our institute has been working with the local water utility under the new management of Alliance Water to address some of those issues. And I might also add that Kentucky Rural Water Association and the Kentucky Division of Water have also been working and partnering with us to try to address some of these issues. So Jason kind of gave a schematic of how the water gets to the homes in Martin County. It goes through a couple of steps. One of those is coming from Tug Fork River, and water is actually pumped from the river over to Crum Reservoir. It is then treated. It's then pumped into pipes that go all the way across the county, and some of the water is stored in storage tanks before it eventually reaches to the individual home. So this slide here kind of just summarizes for each of those steps different things that could potentially be done to reduce some of the disinfectant byproducts. One of the ways, referring back to what Jason mentioned, is just trying to reduce the amount of organic compounds in the raw water that's being treated, either from the river or in the reservoir. And also in reservoirs, we tend to have a greater possibility of having algae blooms. So there are some ways that can be used to reduce the frequency of those. When the water gets to the treatment plant, there's also some things that can be done. In fact, some things have been done. One of the things you can do is change where you're actually disinfecting the water. In the past, the water was actually being disinfected before it actually went into the settling process. And as a consequence, we got a lot more mixing of the chlorine with the organics that was causing a lot of the disinfectant byproducts, and that was causing a lot of the violations that occurred in recent years. A couple of years ago, they actually changed that and started disinfecting the water after a lot of the organics had settled out, and that has improved the amount of, or reduced the amount of disinfectant byproducts that have occurred. There's some other things that can be done in the treatment process by controlling the natural pH of the water or the alkalinity and some other chemical characteristics of the water that can reduce the formation of these. Another way just generally that you can reduce disinfectant byproducts is to change the way that the water is being disinfected. Most systems in the country use chlorine, but there are some other types of disinfectants like chloramines, chlorine dioxide, ozone, and ultraviolet light But those latter techniques are much more costly, and they also have some of their own disadvantages. So, but that is another possible way that could be looked at. And if you're generating a lot of these, even if you're taking these other steps, sometimes treatment plants can put in some additional types of technology and run the water through a filter that has some activated carbon, or run the water through a reverse osmosis process. But again, those are typically very expensive processes and normally used for industrial types of applications. So once you've got the water treated and it's pumped into the system, a lot of the water goes into storage tanks throughout the county. And if the water is not adequately turning over in these tanks, that is getting out of the tanks, water can start to build up in there as far as its age. And as the water ages, that can also tend to increase the formation of these disinfectant byproducts. So there are some strategies that you can do with regard to how you operate the tanks. And also you can try to aerate the water that's going into the tanks that can eliminate some of the disinfectant byproducts. So there are some things we're looking at with regard to storage units. Then the water typically is going through the pipes in the system. If there's a lot of leaks in the pipes, as we see in Martin County, in fact, as a lot of you know, there's about 60 to 70% water loss in the systems. We have a lot of water that's unaccounted for right now. We think some of that is going into the ground via leakage. And if you do have pipes that are open like that and you get some low pressures, then you can actually pull organic material into the pipe system after it's already been treated. That could also potentially lead to some of these disinfectant byproducts. So it's important then to have a good understanding of how the system is operating to try to identify and locate those types of problems. And one of the things we're doing with Alliance is trying to help them develop some computer programs that can then help them better operate their system and identify where some of these types of problems are. As I've talked about, water age and tanks, the same thing can also happen in some of the far reaches of the county. And so you don't want the water to get too old, not only because of other issues that might arise, but certainly with regard to disinfectant byproducts. So one of the strategies that we use is to flush the systems or open up hydrants and let water go out of the system to try to get rid of the older water. So that's another strategy that can be used. Sometimes if you have the pipe that goes from the main pipelines to the house, if they have some cracks and things, that could also cause some of the disinfectant byproducts to be created again from the having organic material get into the system. And then finally, when you get to the home, there's some things that a homeowner could do using carbon filters. In some cases, you could put in a reverse osmosis system, but again, that tends to be pretty expensive and likely for most people in Martin County. Two other practical things, if you have disinfectant byproducts in your water, you can try to kind of get them out by sort of aerating the water. So if you're cooking on a stove and you're heating up water, you're going to have some of those chemicals could potentially come out in the air. And so if you've got a vent fan over your stove, it's a good idea to run that to try to get those vapors out. Same thing if you're taking a shower. You could let the water run for a while before you actually get in to take a shower to try to get some of that older water out of the system and then aerate that. So you would probably want to run your vent in your bathroom, try to get that aerated. So those are just some simple practical things. Another thing, typically with your hot water heaters, the hotter your water, that can tend to make certain chemicals come out and increase your potential exposure. So generally, you shouldn't try to have extremely hot water with your hot water heaters. You want to try to lower that to a reasonable temperature. So those are all just some practical things that could be done. Next slide, talking about some of the things they're working with Alliance right now. is to help them develop some computer models of their systems. So for the last 2 years, we've been working throughout Martin County, collecting data, inspecting different parts of the infrastructure, looking at pump stations and other types of valves. And then we've used this data to build a computer model of the whole water system. So you can show the next slide. This is a map showing how the actual pipes are distributed throughout the county. And this is actually from a computer program that we have developed that allows us to predict how the flows are moving through the system. We can use the model to predict water age across the system, chlorine residuals, and potentially predict levels of disinfectant byproducts that might be forming. Also use the model to help identify potentially where we have leaks and so on. And then one last slide I'll show you is a schematic of the Martin County system. Although the system might look simple from the previous map, when you start to actually look at how all the different parts of the system are interconnected, you can see it becomes, it's actually a very complicated system. And so if you have any particular piece or like a pump or a valve that breaks down, that can cause some operational problems that leads to older water and other issues. So this is an example of another model that we've developed to help the folks at Alliance and the water system better operate their system and better understand how the water is moving through the system. So those are just a few things that we're currently working on. And again, like Jason mentioned, if anyone has any questions, you can always reach me through our institute online, and I'd be glad to address those.
Hi, so this is Nina back again, and we come to the conclusions and the next steps. So in the next slide, we see how UK saw, this is what the study showed, that most Martin County residents do have some problems with their water, whether it's pressure, taste, odor, and a lot don't drink it. They don't trust it. There are some disinfection byproducts and coliform bacteria concerns. The disinfection byproducts and bacteria are higher in the summer and in the early fall when it's warmer, and also when the river level is low. So the next thing we want to look at is going back to our community concerns. Now let's one slide back, there you go. So the first major concern was water quality and health concerns. I guess 19 years later, we found no evidence of the slurry metals in the samples of those that we tested. As far as disinfection byproducts, we did find that 35% of the homes were over the limit for at least one of those. 35% of the 97 homes. For colored water, 51% reported that they had that problem at times, usually after water outages. Bad smell or taste, 66%. Said they had that problem at times, and some said they felt like it was more often than others did. As far as health issues, the concentrations in the Martin County that we saw are similar to those in the studies that showed small increases in bladder cancer rate and certain types of heart birth defects. The next major concern was engineering problems. We now have a new company. Alliance Water Resources has been hired by the Martin County Water District to run the system. And so we're hoping that the system some of the kinks will be worked out. We also have a new engineering firm, Bell Engineering, who is working on the grant processes. So there's money coming in from grants, and Bell Engineering is using that money to try to improve the system, including upgrading the water plant, the intake, the lines. However, at this time, water loss is still a concern. At last month's meeting, well, not for last, there was a 71% water loss reported for the last month. Water outages tend to be less likely and more quickly resolved, I'll have to say. For the pressure problems, we found out as recently as just last week that there are places that have had pretty consistent water pressure problems, very low water pressure problems. And so we're hoping that those will be worked out. And again, we just had someone call the concerned citizens to tell us about it. And so otherwise we wouldn't have known. So it's very important that you let us know. As far as lack of trust, there's a question mark there. I mean, citizens don't trust that water. It's been a long time. It's a real history of it. So, you know, we're still going to have to work through that. And one of the things I think that's affected that is that most of us know that while they have been in compliance for disinfection byproducts for the last 3 years, since 2017, one of the things that was done to help that to happen is they reduced the number of households that were tested. We used to have 4 places in the county where they went once every 3 months to those 4 homes and tested for disinfection byproducts. And in 2017, the Division of Water allowed them to test in only 2 houses. You know, that kind of messes with your trust a little bit. I mean, why is it that all of a sudden we're in compliance, but only 2 houses? That's worrisome. As far as the history of distrust between the water district and the citizens, as Mary Cromer said, that's a 2-way street. And as we found out as recently as last week, when the citizen reported that the pressure was low and consistently low and they couldn't get enough water to shower, they were told that that wasn't true. Fortunately, Public Service Commission came in and said, you have to put a meter on that house. And that they found out that it was true. And several other citizens had the problem. So I'm hoping that the citizens realize from this, if they realize nothing else, come forward, tell people, don't just quarrel about it in your living room. Come forward, come to the meetings, and tell people what the problem is. And then of course, our greatest concern, affordability. It is very expensive to run a water system. The upgrades haven't been maintained. If we don't get people to fill out their census, we're going to get less federal dollars in many ways, and we really need help. The ratepayers of this county can't necessarily afford to fix everything here. We need help from the outside, and fill out your census so they know we're here. And then the next thing that we want to tell you, the next steps is that University of Kentucky is not just doing this and leaving us high and dry. I appreciate them so much. First of all, Jason Unrein has applied for another grant from the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, and he's hoping to expand this not only to Martin County, but to compare it to other places. We found out Letcher County doesn't feel good about their water, so we're trying to expand this and get more citizens the water that they need, and affordable water. The University of Kentucky Water Resources Research Institute, which is Dr. Ormsby Group, is working with Alliance Water, and I think that's great. And I'm hoping that we can do a lot of fixes on this water. Concerned citizens, we're still here. We still have to be here. We still found out last week they're not going to listen to you if you come one at a time. But if you come in a bunch, they're going to listen to you. So in the next slide, we see that we're going to have another meeting of the Martin County Concerned Citizens. Again, it has to be virtual, but Thursday, August the 20th, come and join us online. Tell us, ask us questions. I mean, if something like pops up like, you know, I don't know, I thought about that later, and now I have a question. Ask us, and we'll try to get your answers. And tell us if you're having problems with pressure or anything, affordability, anything. Just let us know because we're fighting for you. And finally, there is a pamphlet that if you fill out this form, we will send you the results so that you can actually have it in your hands. And a wonderful Martin County artist who just graduated from the University of Kentucky has designed this pamphlet. So if you can link on that, then you can actually fill out and request a copy. And we can send it to Martin County residents, or we can email it to others. And of course, Ricky Draper's email is there. If you want a copy of the full report from Dr. Unrein, then there is a link to that here too. And we're gonna put that in here. And last, next slide. We want to thank all of these people. I mean, when you see that there's 6 people here, that is just a very small part of what was here. I mean, all these people gave money. They gave us help with this. We've had people to help just to put this on. So all these groups have come together, and thank you, Lycan, especially in Appalachian Citizens Law Center, for helping us in so many ways. So I guess now we're going to send it back to Ricky, who's going to talk about questions.
Thank you, Nina. Thanks for everyone for sticking with us. We went a little bit over, but we had a lot to say. So Jason, if you can go to the next slide. We really appreciate all of you who came. If you're on Zoom or if you're on Facebook, now is the time, if you haven't already, to please type in some questions, anything you'd like to ask, or like Nina said, we can respond at the meeting, or if you want to email me, I can direct questions to University of Kentucky folks or whatever. And again, we'll plug this just right now that the next Martin County Concerned Citizens meeting is August 20th. That's Thursday evening at 6. It'll be a virtual meeting, probably a similar format. So we have the first question that I probably will send towards Dr. Unrein and Dr. Ormsby. This question is, how does organic matter get into the pipes? Is it because the pipes are not well maintained? Would there be less of the disinfection byproducts, the bad chemicals, if the pipes were better maintained? Thanks for that question, Betsy.
I can try to take that. So the organic material that's interacting with the chlorine can get in on 2 places. One at the treatment plant, where it's then pumped into the distribution system, or it could potentially also get into the system from pipe breaks. And if you have a lot of pipe breaks in the system, you can get low pressures. And if the pressures get too low, organic material could potentially be sucked back into the distribution system, where it can then interact with the chlorine after the treatment plant. So that's another way that you could get potentially organic material into the system. And yes, relative to the question, if you could try to eliminate the frequency of those types of pipe breaks and water loss, that could potentially decrease the amount of disinfectant byproducts.
Thank you, Dr. Ormsby. Jason, do you have anything to add to that? Or that well answered it?
I think you covered it well.
Great. Thank you. This is a great question. I think it is a hard one. From Will Wright, formerly of the Lexington Herald, now with the New York Times. He asks, during times of regular water pressure, do the concerns over disinfection byproducts warrant buying bottled water? For folks with low incomes, is buying bottled water worth the money?
I can
Sure,
take
thanks.
that. So as I mentioned, we didn't measure every possible chemical in the water, but in terms of the disinfection byproducts, for the yearly average, they're in compliance. So in terms of just the disinfection byproducts, they're meeting EPA regulations for the most part. However, we showed in the study that certain times of year, they can exceed the MCLs. Now, for some of the health effects like cancer, it's really the long-term average that matters. One of the things that the author of the Wright et al. Study mentioned with birth defects is that there are questions about whether these seasonal spikes are important if they occur during the sensitive window during the first 3 months of pregnancy. So you'll notice that in the notices that were sent out from the water company, when there's exceedances, it says if you're pregnant or nursing or have health conditions or immune problems, you should consult your doctor. And I think that's pretty good advice. Me personally, I have questions about whether during the summer and the fall, pregnant women should be drinking the water. But the complicated thing here is that most of the exposure to these chemicals isn't necessarily from drinking the water itself. So it's actually from showering and cooking and things like that. So I would say for most people, in terms of disinfection byproducts, it's probably okay to drink the water. Of course, we didn't look at every possible contaminant, and that's not really our responsibility to do that. It's the drinking water utility. I can tell you what I do is at my home is I use one of those faucet filters that removes a lot of different contaminants. I won't mention any brand names. That actually turns out to be a lot cheaper than buying bottled water. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of hard decisions that people are having to make, and that's why it's so important that we focus on these sort of infrastructure fixes so that we can, because we know people are already spending so much on the tap water and then to buy bottled water on top of that. A follow-up to that question, Jason, about the filters, we have a question: how well do the UV light filters work?
I'll let Wendell field that one.
UV radiation can be effective in disinfecting water. The problem is it just kills the bacteria right there as it's leaving the plant. And as the water then goes into the distribution system, it's not continuing to kill bacteria in that system. So one of the advantages of something like chlorine, the reason why we use chlorine in most water systems, or a form of that like chloramines, is the chlorine stays in the water throughout the distribution system. And so that's called a residual. And so it continues to make sure that we don't have bacteria growing throughout the system. Whereas if you just used ultraviolet radiation, you could kill the bacteria leaving the plant, but there would be nothing to continue to make the bacteria go away throughout the distribution system. Oh, I'm reading the comments as I'm seeing this. Relative to using UV light in a home, there was a follow-up. There's probably some better ways to deal with the disinfectant byproducts, I think, than trying to use UV light in a home. Depending upon the intensity that you would need to kill the bacteria, there are some health concerns with the light as far as your eyes and so on. If there are units you can get with UV radiation, but the light units themselves can sometimes get sort of covered up with biofilms and things like that, so you have to maintain those. And then there is an energy cost to operate those as well. So I think probably a better strategy would be to have some type of filter system using like activated carbon, or like Jason mentioned, having some type of filter on your tap would probably be a better strategy than relying on a home unit with UV light.
Thank you. I love this next question. I'll probably send it to Mary Cromer and then Nina if you want to add anything. The question is, so can we Aaron Brockovich them or no? And so Mary, first maybe if you could explain what that means for folks who might not be familiar.
Well, I mean, Courtney, I'm just going to interpret your question to mean, can we sue them for some damages based on the state of the water and some harms that might have occurred over the years from drinking the water? So if that's not what you mean, please let us know. I want to push back on that because this is the community's water system. This water system belongs to Martin County. It doesn't belong to the water board. It doesn't belong to Alliance. It belongs to everyone. And that's another reason that Martin County Concerned Citizens is so important here. If, I'm not going to speculate about whether or not there could be a lawsuit, but if there were a lawsuit, it would just mean that the water district would be having to pay what little money it has, and it does, it's really not making ends meet currently on lawyers. And if there was any kind of payout from a lawsuit like that, I can't imagine where the money would come from. So I think it would be much worse for the community in the end. What is better for the community is not to approach it like that, but to approach it as a problem that everyone needs to come together to solve. And that's what we've been trying to do with the Concerned Citizens Group, and that's what all of us have been trying to do with getting the UK folks involved and working with the PSC. And this is yeah, it's not it's not like we have Dow Chemical that's that's been dumping stuff into the groundwater for years and with complete disregard for the health effects on the community. It's just not a situation like that. And I don't know if Nina wants to add anything or.
Yeah, and I guess it would be hard. We did not prove any cause and effect as far as that goes. Said, we're just trying to find out what's in the water, and we're hoping that it improves, and we're hoping we get another test, another ability to check and see what's going on now. I mean, are there improvements in the water in the system? Not so much about suing, more about fixing.
Oh, great question. This probably also is for Mary, or if anyone else has insight. How frequently does the EPA change their standards, the maximum contaminant level standards? And then do you think they're at a reasonable level? We didn't, for the second question, we didn't get to go into this, but in the technical report, there's some good commentary on that. But, and so I bet Dr. Unrein has something to say, but I'll pass it over to whoever wants to start answering that question.
Well, I think probably several different people have to chime in. I mean, one thing I know is that it's very difficult to change and update regulations. I'm more familiar with EPA updating the methods for analyzing contaminants in water, and that takes a very long time. So I think updating the MCL standards takes a long time too. And as Dr. Ormsby can probably elaborate on, the MCLs are basically set at, with the current technology that we have and the cost constraints, how low can we possibly get? And they're not necessarily meant to completely prevent any possible health effects. Those are the maximum contaminant level goals. So those are lower than the maximum contaminant levels. Do I think they're at a reasonable level? That's a complicated question because there's an engineering component, there's an economic component, and there's a health component, right? So the maximum contaminant level goals are what we want to be looking at from the point of view of health. And one of the questions that I have that I'd like to pursue in my research is whether these seasonal spikes, whether averaging over the year adequately protects against these birth defects when you have seasonal spikes. So that's a question that I have. And I think probably Lyndall and Mary have other things that they could add to this as well.
Yeah, I think Jason is accurate in that discussion. Without going into the details, EPA does sort of periodically go through a process where they're constantly looking at the potential to add additional chemicals to their safe drinking water standards. They typically do this about every 4 or 5 years. As the science continues to develop and new compounds are discovered, they typically will go through a process and sample nationally for these different chemicals to see how frequent there are out there. And then that information is then used to try to decide whether they need to add these chemicals to the drinking water standards. One of the compounds I'm sure everybody's familiar with that is being looked at is PFAS. And recently the EPA did a national study looking across the country for the frequency of those types of chemicals in different drinking water systems. And fortunately in Kentucky, there were just a few hits of that chemical. Of course, we know in West Virginia with the Dow facility up there, there was some significant contamination there. But there is a process where EPA is continuing to look at new emerging chemicals and try to identify those that have potential risk. And then there's a really detailed process that they go through to identify what those risks are. There are different programs. One of those is actually at the University of Kentucky. We're part of a network of universities called the Superfund Research Program that looks at a lot of chemicals and tries to identify what their health impacts are to provide information that can then be used to set those types of standards.
Okay. Mary, do you have anything to add to that?
No, Dr. Ormsby and Dr. Unrein did a great job with that. Nothing, I don't have
Okay.
anything to add.
Great, thank you. Okay, we have time for one more question, one or two more questions. Do we have anybody either from the Zoom or Facebook who would like to ask a question now? We'll give it another minute. I'll go ahead and plug again the Martin County Concerned Citizens virtual meeting on August 20th at 6 p.m. We'd love to have you join us. We have a link to the full report of the study in the chat and a question about, and a link to join our mailing list. Okay, so we'll give it just one more minute. Thank you all so much for joining us. And yeah, Nina.
I'm going to plug, fill out the census, and come to our meeting while we're waiting for more questions. And we can always answer questions you might have later.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. We've been really eager to share these results from the study, and We really appreciate you all sticking with us and asking some questions. The meeting is recorded and we will save it on our on the Martin County Concerned Citizens Facebook page, so you can share it with others. I think if at least the presenters want to come off, turn their video back on, and we can thank everyone for coming. If participants want to turn your video on, and we'd love to see your face for a second. Thank you. Yeah,
thanks everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.